Welcome, everyone. These sessions that we've developed, there are 8 courses in total to begin with, are part of a development process that we are venturing into that will provide a static new Strata Council education program. I'm going to be facilitating the first session, and subsequent staff and other parties will facilitate the other sessions as we go forward. Your input to these sessions will certainly be helpful as we go along. They're designed, hopefully, that we can create 8 30-minute courses that are going to enable new Strata Council members or existing Strata Council members who want to look at a specific topic and get a refresher on it to be able to participate. We will have sponsors, which are helping us to fund the research that we're going forward on all of these. So just a big note of thanks to Strata Engineering for their sponsorship of their session. As I said, this is a pilot project, and we're developing an 8-part education series. Again, we really welcome your feedback, and hopefully by the end of these 8 sessions, as we roll into December, we will have a very good, thorough perspective on the educational information required by Strata Councils and the information that we need to contain within the content without overloading everyone, so that it's possible to look at a specific topic within a half-hour period. Again, this is not legal advice, it's for educational purposes, but if you have specific questions, we're very happy to provide you with a referral as we go forward. So just to the very top at the very beginning, what is a strata corporation? There are over 34,000 strata corporations, and I probably suspect we're close to 35,000 right now, all across BC. They all have different strata plans, they have different bylaws, property designations, geographic locations, local government bylaws, and property uses. And indeed, we have an example of that is really ideal in North Vancouver, which are 4 duplexes built by the same developer, but were filed as 4 separate strata plans. And they do have unique bylaws and unique strata plans. They're what is common property on one is not on the other, and how their parking is used is different. So even though they may look the same, they are often different in use or appearance. Strata Property Act and regulations apply to all strata corporations, wherever a strata plan has been filed in the Land Title Registry. This includes strata corporations that are leasehold plans or strata corporations on First Nations land where the BC Charter has been adopted, and they're part of the Land Title Registry system. So the Strata Property Act regulations, bare land stratas, townhouse stratas, industrial, commercial, recreational, hotel, makes no difference. The legislation in its total capacity applies to all strata corporations in the province. The schedule of standard bylaws within the Strata Property Act also applies to all strata corporations unless your strata has amended them or repealed them or altered them in some fashion. So a strata corporation is created when a strata plan is filed in the Land Title Registry. The titles of each of the strata lots are also subsequently created at the same time. So the moment the strata plan is filed in the Land Title Registry, a unit can be sold, transferred, titled, and the new owner then takes responsibility for it. So even though you may be in a development where only 30% of the new units have been purchased, all of the strata lots and all of the titles are created, and all of the voting rights are created at the same time. Strata lots in a phase development are created when each subsequent phase of a strata plan is filed. So in a phase strata plan, the first phase may just show the strata plan, may show just the strata plan along with the first 15 units that have been created as part of what has been filed. The next phase might show another 15 units, the next part of the strata plan. As each phase is filed, it becomes part of all of the same strata corporation. Here's a list of critical documents I think that everybody really should pay attention to. You should have these in your toolbox, and they can be in the form of a website where they're all posted. They can be printed for every council member, your property manager certainly needs to have copies of them. You need a copy of your registered strata plan. This is absolutely critical because it shows all of your property boundaries. You need a schedule of the voting rights if they've been filed, and we'll look at those shortly. Likewise, a schedule of the unit entitlement to understand how strata fees and special assessments and insurance settlements and things are calculated. You need a copy of all your registered bylaw amendments because it's the only way you can determine which bylaws may in fact be enforceable and in effect. Copies of registered easements, covenants, leases, and licenses. These are all an essential part of your operation of your strata, and they may in fact have some sort of burden or obligations on your strata. Any of the contracts of your strata corporation, including things like your insurance policy. Building schemes, if you're in a bare land strata and you have building schemes, while they may not be necessarily enforced directly by the strata corporation, they can have an impact on your operations. And then, of course, a copy of the Strata Property Act and regulations. Whether you're in Prince George or Fort St. John, Hope, Victoria, Vancouver, makes no difference. The same laws apply to absolutely everyone. When you first go to land titles, and you can create your own land title account just simply with a Visa card, a credit card. You can set up your own account. You can contact our offices. Donna can help you out pulling in records and documents, or you can go to a notary's office or to legal office. There are costs associated with those services, but there are two forms that you really want. You want a copy of your common index. So here's the common index of Strata Plan EPS 4422. And here what we really show in their common index is that they have a number of easements. The easements may be things like BC Hydro, Fortis for gas service, TELUS for telephone access. They may also be easements for items such as a common driveway between two strata corporations where each of you have the right of way to use the common driveway. The easements are also a part of your strata plan. And you should really have each of them printed off to understand if there's any implications to them or any costs that may be associated for you. So on the common index, you will find easements, leases, and airspace parcels. These were items that were created. If you're a leasehold strata, it will show up on the common index. If you're an airspace parcel, the airspace parcel as an easement will also show up on the common index. A general index is essentially what the strata corporation files. So these are your strata corporation filings. These are things like your bylaws, if you've created some limited common property designations. And the other item, your mailing address. Your mailing address is also crucial. You must file it in the land titles. It must be updated because it now becomes a part of the formal notice that's required under hearings with the Civil Resolution Tribunal. A party looking to serve notice to the corporation will go to the general index of the strata corporation and they will find the mailing address. And as you can see, this strata corporation's last mailing address update was in 2020. So we're assuming that they have the same property manager, that nothing has changed. They've since filed, they filed bylaw amendments in 2019. And this gives you an update of basically in an ascending value of the most recent documents and how they were filed. So your common index and your general index basically give you the menu of the documents that you have filed in land titles. These are two documents that I would update. So what's on your strata plan? So it tells you the type of the strata corporation, the boundaries of the strata corporation, the boundaries of a strata lot, and the designations of limited common property and common property. So there's only two types of strata corporations, and that's commercial, industrial, residential. That means very little. What we care about is how the property is designated. The two types of strata corporations are a building type strata corporation, which identifies buildings on the strata plan, and bare land stratas, which have some minor regulations that are separate. So before 2002, one of the documents that we will find on the general index is probably the schedule of, as part of the strata plan, is the schedule of unit entitlement. So on the one plan prior to 2002, and there was a little bit of transition time where some land title offices did it earlier and later. But what you're going to find is on the strata plan, the schedule of unit entitlement and the schedule of voting rights and the schedule of interest on destruction if there was one. So the schedule of unit entitlement is the formula used to calculate the share of all common expenses. The schedule of voting rights identifies how many votes for each unit, but if there is no schedule of voting rights listed, it simply devolves back to 1 vote per strata lot. Whether it's commercial, residential, makes no difference. And then finally, the interest on destruction, which was in a time period in the 70s and 80s. It applied to earlier strata corporations, and it's a formula that was used if the strata corporation was wound up, they sold to a developer, or if it was totally destroyed and there was an insurance settlement involved. After 2002, if your strata plan was filed, the schedule of unit entitlement and the schedule of voting rights are filed as separate documents as part of your indexes. So look for these documents separately. It's important to understand that unit entitlement and voting rights cannot be altered by the strata corporation without a unanimous vote of every owner. So you don't get to round them up, you don't get to modify them or change them in your bylaws. They are a fixed number for the schedule of unit entitlement unless every owner votes in favor of an amendment, which then subsequently would have to be approved by the superintendent of real estate and the registrar of the land title office. Schedule of voting rights cannot be amended. There's no provision to amend it within the legislation. These are filed as separate documents from the strata plan after 2002. So from the time the strata plan is deposited in the land title office, the moment it's filed, the strata corporation is created. All of the owners of the strata lots in the strata plan are members of the corporation, and that's under the name of your corporation. And your legal name is the Owners Strata Plan EPS 4422. That is the legal name that's used to identify trust funds, to identify any assets owned by the corporation, any legal documents that may be used with respect to claims or responses. So subject to any limitation under the Act, a strata corporation has the power and capacity of a natural person in their fully daily tasks. So I'm just going to go on mute for a sec if the ambulance is going to go by. It looks like it's done. So again, the strata corporation has the full power and capacity of a natural person little disruption, sorry, natural person in full capacity. What does that really mean? Well, it means that you're responsible for managing and maintaining the common property and assets of the corporation for the benefit of the owners. It also means the powers and the duties of the corporation have to be exercised and performed by council unless through the Act, the regulations, or more important, which isn't in the Act, but does impact owners, resolutions of the owners approved at a general meeting or the bylaws provided otherwise. So the council is responsible to exercise and perform the duties of the corporation. However, owners may direct or restrict council with respects to the resolutions that they pass. I'll jump back in a moment and talk specifically about the duties or the responsibility of what a strata corporation can do. So there's two types of strata corporations. There's a building strata plan where the buildings and the boundaries of the strata lots are shown on the strata plan. So here's the general understanding of this. The strata corporation responsible for the maintenance and repair of common property, which is shown on the strata plan and generally includes buildings, the structure, and the common property defined by the Act. And remember in the Act, as you go look at the definitions, common property is also defined as pipes, wires, ducts, and cables that are within common boundaries. A bare land strata is where the buildings on the strata lots are not shown on the strata plan. So here the general implication is the strata is not responsible for the maintenance and repair of the building of the strata lots that are not shown on the strata plan. So each owner builds or has purchased a unit that was built, it is not shown, and they're responsible to maintain, repair it, and to insure it separately. It's not a part of the assets or the common property of the corporation. There may be exceptions, though, to the definitions identified in the bylaws, and we certainly have some of those across the province, where the strata corporation has assumed all or part of the responsibility for the maintenance and repair of parts of strata lots in a bare land strata. And this is common where you will have a developer who has built a bare land strata of, let's say, 24 units, but all 24 units are identical. And the owners have identified that there are significant cost savings in a single contract for roofing maintenance and repair and window and siding maintenance and repair. So they've adopted bylaws where the strata has taken responsibility for those items. Here's a building strata plan. This here strata is in a Soyuz, as you can tell from a Soyuz lake. And it's fairly clear that the strata plan itself shows boundaries. It shows the boundaries of the strata corporation. That would be the property boundaries. It shows where the strata lots are located. It shows clearly, if you look at the legend, it shows that there's common property. And there's also limited common property, which are decks. And it specifically says LCP denotes that it is a deck, part of the strata lot. And so this is probably the most important page on most strata plans, is the first page. It identifies the type of strata, and then it gives us an indication on the legend whether there are any designated property areas. The second page shows us actual strata lots, and the strata lot shows the boundary, and then it actually shows areas like a carport, which it identifies these carports are part of the strata lot. They are not separate from the limit, from the units themselves. It shows common property and it shows limited common property. It identifies the strata lot number, so it says strata lot 4. So when you see LCP 4, that means that a balcony area would be part of strata lot 4 as limited common property. And then finally, it shows a cross-section of the building. And this is very common in most strata corporations, although earlier strata corporations don't always show a cross-section. A cross-section is crucial because one of the items that's not identified here is the roofing system. What that tells us is the roofing system is common property. Under the Strata Property Act, any part of an area that is not identified as part of a strata lot is automatically common property. And so when you look at this strata plan, these are townhouses, and the roofing systems, including the crawl spaces and attics, are not part of the strata lots, and they are part of the building, part of the common property, as well as foundations. There's both a top and a bottom boundary to these strata lots. Here's a bare land strata, and I'm sorry this is on its side, but I didn't want to scrunch it up anymore. But one of the key things that to identify a bare land strata, the words bare land strata must appear on the strata plan. Otherwise, it's not a bare land strata. Here, what we show are the boundaries of each of the strata lots. We don't show, there is nothing in this strata plan that shows any of the buildings within this complex. We do have common property, which are roadways, and there is common property as an entry house and a clubhouse. But beyond that, everything else is part of the strata, of each strata lot, which is a bare land strata. Strata is not responsible to maintain, repair, or insure for the buildings in each of the strata lots because they are not shown on the strata plan. Again, the exception to the rule is if the strata corporation actually adopts a bylaw taking responsibility for some of those areas. So again, when you're looking at your strata plan, when you're purchasing insurance, and this is a complaint and an error that we almost see weekly across the province, especially for smaller strata corporations that are 8 or 12 units. If they're all detached units, it's often assumed that they are a bare land strata. They may not be. They simply may be detached building type townhouses. And so you need to look at your strata plan to verify that you're insured properly. Schedule of unit entitlement. So the schedule of unit entitlement, here's one for a bare land strata. In a bare land strata, conventionally, every strata lot pays the same fee. They have the same share of liability and expenses. This is an older strata plan, which has its schedule of interest on destruction. And even though everybody pays exactly the same share of expenses, what the developer at the time had determined is that there are some lots that are larger, more valuable. Some probably face a river or they have a view. And what they did is they put a higher level on basically on real estate values in the event that the Strata Corporation was dissolved and the funds were dispersed. This schedule of interest on destruction on older Strata corporations applies in the events that the Strata Corporation is wound up. Here's a schedule of unit entitlement for a building strata. And I used a very small one, so it's easy to capture them all in one side. But this would make no difference if this was 4 units or 400 units. It still is formulated the same way. And what we have is the habitable area, which is then converted over to the unit entitlement, which we traditionally have always called square footage. It's now meters squared, but we always called it square footage. And so each unit share, so you'll see that unit 1 has a share of 376 of 1578. Unit 2 is 375, unit 3 is 376, and unit 4 is 451. So we have 3 units that are almost the same and a 4th unit that is substantially larger. Don't round up, don't change, don't alter. Always use the same formulas. 376 divided by 1578 times the amount of money that strata lot 1 would owe. And that will tell you things like your annual strata fees. It will tell you things like special levies, or if you had an insurance settlement for wind up, it could apply in that circumstance as well. The formula applies to all building strata corporations the same. If you wish to amend this formula so everybody's paying the same unit entitlement, the same fees, it will require a unanimous vote of all owners voting in favor, a correct certificate filed on land titles, and the approval of the superintendent of real estate and the registrar of land titles. Unit entitlement is applied to all common expenses, strata fees, contingency contributions, and special levies. This is all within the same formula. Here's a schedule of voting rights for a strata corporation. Again, older strata corporation, but this one was actually filed. It's not necessary to file a schedule of voting rights if every strata lot has 1 vote. They just did it by habit in this circumstance. It's clearly a bare land strata. Everybody's unit entitlement is the same. Everybody's interest on destruction is the same, and the schedule of voting rights is 1 vote per strata lot. But let's look at a mixed-use strata corporation. Here's a schedule of voting rights for a mixed-use strata corporation. So when you have non-residential units, what we do is they look at the average size of the residential units, and then they base the voting rights on the non-residential units on a comparable value. So strata lot number 1 is probably 2.8 times larger than the average residential side. So it gets 2.8 votes. Strata lot 2 is 0.7 votes. Strata lot 3 and so forth. And so you see the total number of votes is 11.6. So we can never use the application of a majority vote being 50% plus 1. That doesn't work. Under our legislation, it's always a majority of the votes cast. So if everybody voted in this strata corporation, and I'm going to do some real quick math here, I believe that 5.8 of the units would have to vote in favor. And it would be possible to have 5.8 5.9. It would actually have to be 5.9. 5.9 votes, which is very possible in this circumstance, to be a majority vote. It's not 50% plus 1. And again, the votes are all very much within capacity of who shows up at general meetings. In a future session, we're going to go through some very intimate and intricate details on how voting is calculated and voting is numbered. A schedule of voting rights is absolutely essential to be sitting in front of the person who chairs your meetings. If you have mixed-use building and you have different voting rights and a different voting schedule, the outcomes can be substantially different. So here are base principles, just a little primer review. The Strata Property Act and regulation applies to all strata corporations. No, there are no exemptions. A strata corporation is not a company under the Business Corporations Act in BC. Business Corporations Act doesn't apply. The conventions or the provisions don't apply. The rules of order for strata corporations are the Strata Property Act, the regulations, and the bylaws of the corporations. Robert's Rules of Order do not apply to strata corporations unless they've been specifically adopted under their bylaws. Again, for a future session, but these 4 areas are probably the most common misconceptions or the most commonly misunderstood conditions within strata corporations. Here's just a little bit of a follow-up on what a strata corporation has the power and the capacity of a natural person to do. A strata corporation can purchase land, it can lease land, lease property, it could lease vehicles, it can mortgage real estate that is owned by the strata corporation, it can sell common assets, it can manage a strata lot as a landlord, it can purchase furnishings, equipment, vehicles. It really is the same capacity of a person who has the ability to do all of these things. Strata corporations can open bank accounts, can invest funds, they can commence court actions, they can be named in a court action, they can defend against an action, or they can agree to a settlement. And subject to fines, and strata corporations are subject to fines, penalties, and orders by regulating authorities. And there are a number of them in BC that can affect us. You also have to remember that strata corporations have to comply with all levels of law and regulatory authority. So, for example, here we have the Federal Tax Act. Strata corporations must file an annual tax return. It's a simple return. It's a T2 short with a 1044 information form. There's no revenue gained. You don't have a profit at the end of the year, but it's a simple filing requirement. The Bank Act is one of the provisions that apply to strata corporations and all businesses in the country. The BC Human Rights Code applies to strata corporations in British Columbia. The Regulatory Authority of Technical Safety BC and WorkSafe both apply to strata corporations, and they may order strata corporations to do things the same as your local governments or regulatory authorities within your local governments. And then, of course, the Residential Tenancy Act. If your strata corporation owns a rental unit which you have a tenant in, you are subject to the Residential Tenancy Act as well. So that's the basic primer of how a strata corporation is created, its basic responsibilities, and the essential documents that you need for the operation of your strata corporation. So just a little feedback now. So we are developing an 8-part course. This is the first introduction to the course. As we go onward now, each of the sessions will become much more detailed as we deal with voting and insurance and meetings, repair and maintenance of property and alterations, and a number of other things as we go forward. If you have any feedback, please send Rosalina an email address. I did leave the chat opened. If you want to add any questions or any comments in the chat, that's fine. You can do that. We'd appreciate that. Our next session is October 17th at 12 noon. And it's going to be dealing with the types of meetings that we have in voting thresholds. So we'll be talking about council meetings, committee meetings, information meetings, annual general meetings, special general meetings, petitioned meetings that occur, and court-ordered meetings that occur. And then, of course, we will talk about the different voting thresholds, which are majority votes at council meetings, which are calculated differently than majority votes at general meetings, 3/4 votes, 80% votes for windups, and unanimous votes or 100% votes for amendments to the strata corporation strata plan. thank you so much for joining. We'd really look forward to your feedback in the future. We will be doing these all separately, and we will be creating this as a long-term education program. And so Donna will be sending out the slides to everybody as soon as we're done, so that you have them for your background. And that would be just great. And contacting Donna at Land Titles is just simply info@choa.bc.ca, and she can help you out with any requests that you have for your land title documents. So we'll look forward to seeing you in the future events, and thank you again.